Welcome back. We have finally dove in below the fold here in my musical collection. These guys, I've decided to go for the one that's directly below this guy right here. It's a little bit of a hodgepodge in terms of this, but this cubby holds the musical works of 3 bands and all of the artists that came from it. We start off with kind of the kicker offer of all of these, and that is King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King. This guy revolutionized music. This was kind of the first album to really show what progressive rock meant, and a lot of people consider this to be the staple progressive rock album as a masterpiece. From there, we come to the follow-up, In the Wake of Poseidon. We come to a re-release. I'm still kind of keeping my eye out for the original, but it's hard, and that is Lizard, the King Crimson Lizard. If you watched last week's edition, I said that the apartment that I was living in at the time got flooded, and unfortunately this was one of the albums that got a little bit water damaged as well. Lizard, the second side, has one of the most beautiful moments in all of musical history. I Have Islands as well. Can't help but love it. The experimentation that the band was going through at this time was just stellar. Lark's Tongue and Aspect. A lot of people love this album. I don't love it quite as much as everybody else, but I do just love the experimentation, and by this point Bill Bruford had joined the band, and his addition was just breathtaking. Then we go to Starless and Bible Black. The second side on this album is just wonderful. Then we come to one of my favorite albums. This and Court of the Crimson King kind of tie, and that is Red. And then the final one that I have from them is Discipline. This one, I felt like that was when the band was really... once they moved into the 80s, it was a little bit of a chore for me to get into. Not being a musician, I didn't appreciate it as much as the rest of the crowd, but I still really enjoyed what they did. So from there, we move on to the next band, and that is Genesis. Now, I used to have From Genesis to Revelations, but my dad took that back when he got his turntable a couple years ago. But I was able to find Trespass. A Vision of Angels is one of my favorite tracks by the band, and it's really underrated. And of course, you've got the standout track of The Knife. Then we go into Nursery Crimes, which sees Steve Hackett as well as Phil Collins joining the band. Then we come into Foxtrot, one of the band's masterpieces. Supper's Ready, everybody knows at this point. Then we have Genesis Live. Then we come to my favorite album of all time, Selling England by the Pound. I've already talked at length about that. Then we come to Peter Gabriel's last album with the band, and only double concept album from the band, which is Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Then we come in to, again, one of my favorite albums of all time, Trick of the Tail. Then I also found a Trick of the Tail outtakes. It has a few rarities. It has some different mixes. It's got a little bit of like demo tracks on here as well. Very interesting. I think it's like just a fan piece. Then we have Wind and Weathering. Then we have a very used copy of Seconds Out. I mean, this album is just, we've listened to this, my dad and I, countless times, to the point where like the grooves practically ran all the way through the record. Then we come to, and then there were 3, an underrated, darker approach to still the complex. They tightened up the songs. They didn't go quite on length. Really enjoy that one. Then we have Match of the Day, their EP with a Match of the Day, Inside Out, and Pigeons. Then I come to one of my favorite bootlegs of the band, From the Mouth of the Monster. This was the bootleg, the show. I believe it was from Chicago that they did this one through. Yeah, it was recorded in October 13th, 1978, the Uptown Theater in Chicago, USA. And this was the record, or at least the album that they were promoting at the time was, and then there were 3, so there's a lot of tracks from that album on this. Then we come into one of their more financially and commercially successful albums, Duke. I didn't really like this when I was as a teenager. I felt like it was a little bit of a departure of form. But as an adult, I'm actually really liking this. I love the first side, and I love how the Duke concept kind of came about, and was supposed to be like their return to like a really full-length, one-song album side, but they kind of chickened out last moment. Then from there, we've got 3 Sides Live, The only reason why I like that is the introduction of the medley, which became a staple of their concert goings. Then we have Invisible Touch, probably my favorite of all their like really poppy stuff. Like if you're talking about We Can't Dance, Abacab, and Invisible Touch, this one's probably my favorite just for the Brazilian alone. Like that last track on this album is just friggin' amazing. So from there, we go into the first solo artist, and that is of Peter Gabriel. So we've got Peter Gabriel's first album, and I actually have 2 copies of this one. This one is the original pressing from like the 70s, and this one's the re-release where it's a little bit thicker, and I had to pick it up. It's one of the few times where I've actually bought an album twice. Then we have the second album of Scratch. Still trying to get into it, not my favorite. We then have Melt, or the third one. Again, not my favorite. It wasn't until we got into this guy that I really, really loved. We have Rhythm of the Heat, San Jacinto, I Have the Touch. Some really, really darker approaches there. Then we come to his live album, the first live album, as well as the theme or the soundtrack to Birdie. Then we have his most commercially successful album of So. I enjoy this album more and more as I've matured. I didn't really like this, again, same with Duke. I didn't really like it when I was a teenager. I thought that it was too much of a departure. But Red Rain, Sledgehammer, heck, even In Your Eyes, I still love. Then we have a bootleg of That Kind of Time, as well as a re-release super heavy-duty edition of Us. I really, really enjoy this album. Now this actually plays on 45, so you have to turn up the speed on that a little bit. And likewise, I also have the Up. This might be my favorite album from him outside of the first album. His first album by far, hands down, is still my favorite. But this one holds such beautiful tracks such as Darkness, Growing Up, and Signal to Noise. Signal to Noise is one of my all-time favorite tracks of any artist. And then we have his Scratch My Back and I'll Scratch Yours. This was a very interesting project, and if you open it up, you see the covers of the two. You've got Scratch My Back and I'll Scratch Yours. Originally, this was going to be a double concept album in that he would commission other artists to do renditions of his songs, and he in turn would do covers of theirs. The stipulations being that no drums or guitars were to be used. So he put out Scratch My Back, which was his covers of other people's songs, and some of them are really, really interesting. And then when we got into And I'll Scratch Yours, there were some balls dropped, and you're going to get that with any project this ambitious. It was still a very interesting one. It does hold one of my least favorite covers of all time, and that's Salisbury Hill by Lou Reed. I love Salisbury Hill. Salisbury Hill is one of my favorite all-time songs, and what Lou Reed did with it, didn't really connect with it. Moving away from Peter Gabriel, we come into Mike Rutherford, and this isn't actually Mike and the Mechanics. Mike and the Mechanics is his big solo project. This is just straight up Mike Rutherford, and this one is The Small Creeps Day. Next up, we have Steve Hackett. His first album, Voyage of the Acolyte, breathtakingly beautiful. Can't praise it enough. Shadow of the Hierophant, just, I can't not be moved. Then we have Spectral Mornings, a fantastic album from him. I love the second side on that, and Clocks is a fun track as well. Then we have the album that came out a few years ago of Wolflight that is really, really nice, really enjoyable. That. From there, we go into Anthony Phillips and his album of 1984. I do have the Geese and the Ghost, as well as Private Parts, Part 1 and 2, Up the Cottage. So I keep this guy here in the city. Now, I used to have Tony Banks's albums of Bank Statement as well as Curious Feeling. Curious Feeling is such an underrated album, and I'm kind of saddened that out of all of the Genesis solo projects, Tony's is the one that gets overlooked the most. Definitely Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins are the two heavy hitters. Steve Hackett has acquired quite the cult following. Mike Rutherford and Mike and the Mechanics has a little bit of notoriety, maybe not as much within the populace eye, but Tony just unfortunately never got his footing. And I don't know why. Like, Curious Feeling was a really, really deep and beautiful album, but just could never really get the formula right. So I don't have any of Tony's albums, even though Curious Feeling is a fantastic album. So from there we come into the last of the three big groups that we covered. And the last one is Yes. So we have the first album of Yes. Then we have A Time and the Word. Then we have the Yes album, the really big breakout album from them. This has a lot of their staples. Yours Is No Disgrace, Starship Trooper, Perpetual Change. And to solidify that progressive rock notoriety, we have Fragile. And I love the fact that Fragile started what could have been a concept visual. I actually love Fragile as a concept because each band member had their own individual song that was like completely theirs, as well as coming together on like 3 or 4 tracks, like Roundabout and Heart of the Sunshine. So it showed what the band can do separately as well as together, and I really like that concept. And so we actually have like the concept, as I was saying, of the planet that we have here, and we have the planet in its whole state, and then it starts to kind of explode on itself, as we can see within their masterpiece of Close to the Edge. As I said within the last one, a lot of the albums that I got from my uncle were cut, so that's there. And we have a little bit of the planet from Fragile still on there. I have that poster actually in my bedroom. Then we have one of my favorite albums from the band, Tales of Topographic Oceans. And then from Tales to Relayered, we lost Rick Wakeman. But Rick Wakeman did come back for Going for the One, which turns out to be one of my favorite albums from the band. It's also the first album in a while where Roger Dean isn't helming the graphic design, but the artist from Pink Floyd, who used him for Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, as well as Led Zeppelin used the same artist for Houses of the Holy, as well as Presence. So he was commissioned to do this album, but Roger Dean does come back for Yes Shows. I also have a fantastic little bootleg of The Sorcerer's Apprentice. This has Gates of Beryllium, Your Move, Move for the Day, Long Distance Run Around the Clap, and then And You and I. And then we have Drama. This guy is a very interesting one because this is when Yes teamed up with the Buggles. So Yes lost Rick Wakeman and John Anderson, but gained most of the members from the Buggles. And the Buggles you'll know as Video Killed the Radio Star, which was released like a year and a half, 2 years ago before this album. A very interesting album. One that I actually enjoy. Like, I love Machine Messiah and Tempest Fugit. And then we have the 91502, I think it is. Yeah, 90125. So my album review for this has gotten the most dislikes. I guess people didn't quite realize that a lot of it was tongue-in-cheek. Not my favorite. Definitely a very beautiful album in terms of the production, but I still don't like the music. Sorry. And then from there we have another masterpiece that is overlooked far too often. And that is Magnification. If you haven't listened to it by now, please do yourself a favor and listen to it. So those are all the studio albums from Yes. Let's dive into some of the solo projects. And first up we have the late Chris Squire doing Fish Out of Water. Beautiful album. Then we go into Rick Wakeman. So of course no progressive rock collection would be complete without The Wives of Henry VIII. Then we have my favorite work from him, and that's The Myth and Legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. I also have The Journey to the Center of the Earth. Then I have his renditions of 1984. Then we have Rick Wakeman, No Earthly Connection. And of course we have Steve Howe, Beginnings. Finally, rounding all of this off, the last artist that we have is John Anderson. One of my favorite albums of all time, Oasis of Sun Hollow. Yeah, that's it. Oasis of Sun Hollow. So good. Such a beautiful album. And wrapping this all off is the follow-up of Songs of Suin. It's okay. It's no Sun Hollow, but it'll do. And so that's about it. That's all I could fit into the cubby just below this one. It's got the 3 groups of Genesis, King Crimson, and Yes. Those are my 3 favorite progressive rock bands, so they got their own cubby with all of the solo projects that each of the members had. From there, we go into a lot of other progressive rock bands, and that will be in this cubby that I'm pointing to right down there. So look out for that. That's coming up next week. So that's about it. What did you guys think? What was your favorite album? What was an album that you feel should have been in this collection that wasn't? Let me know by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is, of course, in honor of my 1,000th subscriber. You guys are the best for doing that. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And that's about it. All right. Until next time, notes out.